Agenda is roll call of commissioners present. I will announce each commissioner's name. Please indicate if we're here or not. All right, Commissioner Axtell. Commissioner Beloga.
Present.
Commissioner Barnes.
Here.
Commissioner Guterman. My apologies if I mess up any of the names. Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Commissioner Hunt.
Present.
Commissioner Lindell.
Here.
Commissioner Nelson. Commissioner Nelson. Commissioner Peterson.
Here.
Commissioner Grant. Commissioner Grant Peterson.
We both said here.
And then Commissioner Steve
Here.
Commissioner Stanley.
Here.
Commissioner Taylor.
Present.
Morrison is here. Present.
Here.
Commissioner Fuller.
Here.
All right, on to approval of the minutes from May 6th, 2021. Does anybody have any questions or comments or corrections regarding those minutes?
So a note for those present, Derek, I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
we noticed after the packet was published that the earlier version that was not complete got put in the packet, was not published. So just to note that the seconds and the motions and the vote counts and ordinance resolution numbers have all been filled in, and the version that will be signed after the meeting is official. So it's just in case people were wondering, that was just an area in the fact sheet, the incomplete version.
Well, and I'm not sure my name is misspelled, so I don't know if that's a problem or not.
We'll fix that.
All right, we have a motion to approve those minutes. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And just for clarification, the motion was by Taylor, who seconded. All right, and then we have approval. There's a correction here as well. We have approval of the minutes from October 7th, 2021. That was one of our special meetings. Once again, are there any corrections, comments, concerns?
Thank you. I've got three comments. The first is that I'm listed both as present and absent. I was absent. The second is on 2.3, where it says Mark Thorson asked whether to use the next uniform election date or first uniform election. And there's no response.
Well, Mayor, member, especially not Mayor, that was a point that was made, and then we kind of picked it up. There was some discussion about it, and we picked it up a little bit later, but there wasn't any subsequent decision or notable things to put after. You can certainly add more information, but I noticed the same thing too when I was reading through it.
I think if there's a question, there has to be some indication of what the response is, because otherwise it appears as if there's
More information, like
All right, we'll take care of that.
And the last one is the third paragraph of the bottom. There's a term in there called chair members, which I never heard of. It's in the second line of the third paragraph.
I think I probably meant charter members there,
Simply the chairs.
or that.
I'll have to check on that. Thank you.
So we've been postponed approving the minutes. It's very likely to be
a motion and a second to postpone action on it until the annual meeting.
So somebody like to make a motion. Second. Motion by Beloga, second by Grant Peterson. Commissioner Grant Peterson. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. I don't know if we normally have had on here, an approval of the agenda on the commission. I just want to indicate that, in terms of the agenda, so later in this agenda, we will be approving electing a new chairperson. And I would just like to indicate that, I would like to pass that torch along to someone else in the future. So be thinking, about, considering who you would like to nominate as chair, or anybody who's welcome to self-nominate, but I wanted to indicate that. So, if you can think about it, our discussions here. And then moving on to item 4, unfinished business. We have no unfinished business. On to item 5.1, charter amendment section. We have
All right. Chair and members, this much for being here tonight, and many of you have seen the first slide before. First time we're going to be looking at tonight, Charter Section 2.03. So as you recall, the charter is the city's constitution. There are multiple ways to take action on amending the charter. The one that's being proposed for your consideration tonight from all 4 of the proposals is for the Charter Commission to make a recommendation or resolution to the City Council. Thereafter, the City Council we formally receive recommendation from the Charter Commission, scheduled, and then the council must unanimously vote to adopt that charter. There are, as you probably remember, since we've done this in the last couple of years, other ways as well. But the one that's being proposed actually is the most, when I say efficient, I mean sort of time efficient. So once the Charter Commission, once the City Council approves the charter amendment, then it's published, and then there's a period of 90 days. And so if you took action to recommend to see public hearing would happen in June, and if it is adopted by the City Council, it would become effective in September. So that's sort of the time horizon, and that's one of the quickest ways to amend the charter. And we're making that proposal based on the nature of the proposals tonight, and that there are 3 of them are large.
The proposed amendment, Commissioners, it has 2 substantial changes, I'll say, to our current charter. The first change deals with the timeline for redistricting. And our current charter lays out a timeline for redistricting that is not consistent with the timeline set by state statute. And we are required to follow the timeline in state statute. Went through that process, and I'm excited to say met that timeline. And so this amendment, the first proposed change, would simply refer back to state law when discussing what the timeline is for our redistricting process. Go to the next one. The second proposed change does 2 things. The first thing that it does, for a little background, the state law actually specifies that council terms expire on the first Monday of the year following a municipal election. In our redistricting section of the charter, we state that council member district terms end on December 31st of the year where the election is held. And so we need to push that back basically a few dates, right? So instead of December 31st of 2023, for example, so after this redistricting process, it would be the first Monday in 2024 to align with the statutory deadline or dates for when council member terms end. So that's the change to the charter that actually makes a change to when our council member district council member terms are up after redistricting. The second change in here is rewording this section for clarity and ease of understanding. When we've been using this section of the charter and referring to this section of the charter, I've had community members, I've had staff who have had a hard time with the existing reading of the charter and determining for district council members, when we do a redistricting, when do their terms end? Who has, because we have staggered terms, so which district council members' terms end early, which ones end, have the 2-year shortened term after the next election after redistricting. And so this attempts to lay out, we have redistricting. After redistricting occurs, all 4 district council member seats are on the ballot in the next municipal election on the next odd numbered year. Those terms then begin in the next even numbered year. So I'll show you a chart in a minute to kind of show you how this plays out. And then it clarifies that districts 1 and 2 begin with 2-year terms. And then after that are 4-year terms. Districts 3 and 4 begin with 4-year terms. And then you'll see as the calendar lays out, because after redistricting, all of the district council members' terms end in basically the 3rd year, the year ending in 3, that the way the math works, districts 3 and 4 have 2-year terms right before redistricting. And that sounds confusing, so I'm going to have you move to the next slide to kind of lay it out in a calendar view. Okay, I'll stand up because I missed the point. So this gives you an example of what the current language is and how that lays out for when the district council members are on the ballot and what the proposed language is. And the yellow is the actual change in, substantial change in when the district council members' terms expire. And so you can see here, when we have our statewide redistricting in 2022, the next odd numbered year, 2023, all district council member seats are on the ballot, and that remains the same. But under our current language, those district council member terms end on December 31st of that odd numbered year. To align with state statute, the proposed language changes that to those seats expiring the first Monday in January of the next even numbered year. So that's the change that you see, that first change that I mentioned. And then you can see that districts 1 and 2 are on the ballot again 2 years after. So they have a 2-year term. Then we have districts 3 and 4, districts 1 and 2, districts 3 and 4, and then we go through statewide redistricting. So districts 3 and 4's term are only 2 years. So it's the same term, the same timing for those 4 districts. It's just an attempt to clarify that process and make it a little clearer in our charter. So as people are reading through that, they understand the intent and which district council member terms are shortened before redistricting and then which ones are shortened after redistricting. Okay. And the state statutes that we're referencing, the first 2 listed on the back bullet point, have to do with the redistricting process and timing. Minnesota Statute 205.07 is the one that addresses the council member term start date. And then 41021 addresses city council elections, or city elections and application of election law.
All right, so again, and this is the timeline that I talked about earlier on, to give you a sense of sort of what next steps would be. And of course, assuming that everything happens on those dates, certainly the council could choose to move a little bit but there are limits in state law as to when action must happen. And if it doesn't happen, then there are consequences for the whole. So this is the same as it's been in years past, and I provided you with an update. So again, now would be the time for questions and discussion. And if you, there are the requested actions up there on the slide.
Chairman Thorson, I believe I understand the intent of the language and the chart, but when I read this the first time, I wrote to myself, it wasn't clear to me that the way the language at the bottom of subdivision 4 on page 15, that the last sentence is sufficient to accomplish or clear, doesn't clearly imply what follows. That is to say, it reads, following redistricting, which is a long time. The initial terms of the council members elected to districts 1 and 2 are 2 years, and the initial terms of the council members, I guess the key there is the word initial. And if that's sufficient to get us, because what wasn't clear to me is, well, could someone read this to mean that every election cycle, districts 1 and 2 are only 2 years, and districts 3 and 4 are always 4 years? I understand it's only meant to be that first election cycle. So I just wanted to raise the question in case it was unclear to anybody else's mind, or if the word initial here was sufficient to get us where we might be.
No, I didn't catch what you said.
In other words, if I wasn't quite clear, a sentence at the end of this saying something to the effect of, thereafter, every term will be 4 years until, or maybe that's not like that. The opinion of the,
Yeah, I think commission.
Commissioner Steve Hughes. That part.
okay.
It was just this, I think. We look at both of those together.
Yes, Commissioner Barnes.
It's interesting that the 10 years.
Which one?
May I answer that? Because the terms are 4 years, with what ends up happening is before redistricting, districts 3 and 4 are elected for a 2-year term, and then all of the council member districts are back on the ballot again. And then after that, then districts 1 and 2 are elected for a 2-year term. The next year, districts 1 and 2 will be elected for a 2-year term. So before redistricting, districts 3 and 4 have a 2-year term. And then after redistricting, districts 1 and 2 have a 2-year term. And so all 4 districts do at some point during the redistricting calendar, if you will, the 10-year cycle, have a 2-year term and have, if you will, an extra election.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Chairperson, just as a point of curiosity, this is broader than just the 5.1. When was section 410.12 adopted by the state? Yeah, that's the clause here. Wondering when, you know, have we been out of compliance for 10 years or 30 days? That's what it was.
Chair, it was adopted, or years have been adopted in 1909, and it hasn't been amended since.
I'm sorry I asked.
Point of clarification, that 410.21 is application of general election. So that's so
If I may, last time the statute for the 6-year plan for speed was amended with the election. And I do recall in 2012 was
Questions? If not, we would be looking for this item.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve 5.1 charter amendment to the section.
Second.
Motion by Lopez, second by Hunt. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. On to item 5.2, charter amendment to section 3.01. We understand.
go ahead onto the next slide for me, please. And then the next slide. Item 5.2, Chair and Commissioners, is another item to bring us into compliance with state statutes. This time it's the statute that relates to, as I mentioned in the previous one, the statute that dictates when city council member terms begin. And the statute says that city council member terms start on the first Monday in January following the election. So our current, and our charter does state that. The issue is that our first business meeting of the year per our charter, following a regular municipal election, is the first business day in January. And so where that causes an issue is in years where the first business day in January is before the first Monday in January, technically our newly elected council members' terms have not officially begun. And so the proposed amendment ensures that the first business meeting of the year following a municipal election is held on or after the council member's term officially begins. And I have a sample calendar just to show you the difference. I'm going to stand up because I like to point. So under our current charter provisions, I've just picked January 1st as a Tuesday, right? So our first business meeting, our annual meeting, would be the 2nd, a Wednesday. Technically, our council do not begin until the following Monday. And so under the proposed, now we would have our council terms beginning and the annual meeting happening on the same day, or if January 1st happens to be a holiday, we would hold it on the following day, the following business day.
Thank you. That makes sense. Anything else on this? Any questions from
Oh, I'm sorry, there is one more piece.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Next slide. There we go, personal service. The second piece of this proposed amendment is removing the word personal from the requirement to provide each council member with a notice of special meeting. This just acknowledges the fact that most meeting notices are now delivered electronically to our council members. We have the same proposed timeline. And then the next slide.
All right. Any questions given that additional information? Kohler.
Thank you. Was the original intent also to provide a delivery, or is that in general?
Commissioner Fuller, my understanding is that a receipt of delivery would not be required underneath this, the current charter provision. So I believe it was, when it was originally passed, was to ensure that a council member received the notice of the meeting, that it didn't get lost in the mail or, and it was physically brought to that council member when it had to be sent.
Sure. I'm guessing, but historically speaking, in many cities, it was common for police officers or community service officers to hand deliver the package to council members, and or a staff member would just sort of leave it in their doors, and then they would get it when they got home or whatever. And that practice has not been common in Bloomington for quite some time. We have been posting it electronically and also delivering it by email. And sometimes council members would come and pick it up. And so if you sort of interpret the word personally delivered as arriving in your mailbox and just your mailbox, your email box, then I guess it means that, but within the world of sort of interpretation, personally delivered tends to mean something else. You're handing something. So we felt that this kind of made it more accurate to what that
Move. Motion by Stanley, second by Rendell. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. On to charter, item 5.3, charter amendment, section 4.06.
Item 5.3 makes minor changes to the information required as part of our canvass of our municipal election in order to ensure conformance with state law and provide clear, understandable results. So the two proposed changes are to remove the term good from ballots cast. So it would just be ballots cast versus good ballots cast. What I found is that on our canvas, when members of the public read good ballots cast, they want to know where the bad ballots cast are, right? It causes a little bit of confusion. And the only ballots that are cast and counted in an election are ballots that meet the statutory requirements to be counted. And so this just clarifies the ballots cast. Any ballots that have an issue, are spoiled, or defective are already accounted for in a separate item on it. The other change is keeping the wording a bit for the last item that's required as part of the canvas. Instead of all other information as pertinent, the language is changed to all other required information. And that just kind of acknowledges that there are sometimes requirements in state statute of what we might need to include in a canvas. And then our ranked choice voting city code speaks to additional statistics that are provided as part of the canvas via the ranked choice voting tabulation process. So that just clarifies that it's required information in front of either state law or city code. Same proposed timeline. And then question.
Once we have any questions on this particular, motion by Colbert, do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Taylor. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. On to item 5.4, charter amendment to section 207.
And Chair, I would also offer that,
You're welcome to leave unless you just would love to know the outcome.
I'll catch it on the video.
Thank you for.
Right.
All right, so, Chair and Commissioners, this item was brought to my attention by the city manager. And he asked that I bring this forward for your consideration. It has to do with, it sort of arises out of the fact that we have a very sporadic tradition in the city of Bloomington at South. If you'll note in the packet, the most recent time that the salaries were looked at, or acted on, I should say, was 2007. That was a long time ago. And one of the reasons, the main reason that the city manager would like the charter commission to think about this is because we, as a city and as city council, asked that the council review the compensation of staff members and the compensation plan annually. And that allows for regularized budgeting, regularized review, frankly, regular analysis. And this proposal would extend that same process to the salaries of the mayor and council members. What I did to prepare this language here is that I looked at a variety of different cities around the charter cities, of course, around Minnesota, of a similar size. So St. Cloud, Duluth, Rochester, Egan, Mankato, sort of, that kind of city. I looked at their language and their code and their charter. By way of reminder in the packet, you saw the state law requirement that changes to council salaries have to be done by ordinance, which I'm sure you remember would require a public hearing. And so there are mechanisms and checks and balances in that process that are inherent in the process. And this particular approach that's in your packet for your consideration tonight comes from the city of Mankato. And practically speaking, I spoke to their city attorney. She did not indicate that they had sort of any problems with this particular approach. They happen to codify the salaries in their code, and they have actually some other language in their code which I'm not bringing forward for your consideration, which is not in their charter. But essentially how this will play out, so to speak, if this was in the charter, would be that the first meeting in July of this year, well, actually it would be next year, because this ordinance wouldn't go into effect until September, so it would be in 2023. The salary would be an agenda item on the city council agenda. And then there would be a discussion. If you leave in both of those sentences, it would require the council to act they would have to act within a certain time frame. And place it have an ordinance, have a public hearing and an ordinance to set this up. If you only include the first sentence of this language, I'm of the opinion that the council could decide to not take any action and hold it over until the next year. Because they wouldn't be, what the state law says is that you have to act by ordinance to fix the salary. So if they're not taking any action, all they're doing is discussing it as an benefit, you would meet the technical requirements of your charter. But if you included both of those sentences, they would need to take action each year on their salaries. And some cities do that. Based on my research, some cities definitely do that as part of their annualized review. Some cities have an automatic escalator of a certain percentage in their code, and there's a whole variety of approaches. So again, this is coming from the city manager asking you all to take a look at it, to again create some regularized review. And I have a little bit more information about the specifics of some of these other cities. I went about and collected, just in case you're curious, the salaries of some of those other cities as well for the frame reference. So I have that information if you'd like it. I didn't put it in the packet because, frankly, I was actively collecting it, and I had some of it and I wanted to collect more, and that comes up pretty early in the presentation. So, but I have that. I'm happy to provide that information to you here as well. But basically, teeing it up to the discussion tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions about it.
Thank you. So, a couple questions. Number one, is there a problem here we're trying to solve? And I realize that the actions or even meetings on council salary are not taking place on a regular basis. But all of our councils of the past and our city managers can always put this item on the agenda. It doesn't require a charter amendment to do that. So I'm wondering if there's a problem I'm not seeing here that is the reason we're being asked for this. And then number two, I would be curious about how many, you mentioned some cities here that you research, but how many of them actually have something like this in their charter? To me, it seems like not a charter type item like we did see. That's just my initial view on this. And with that, maybe we'll hear Commissioner Peterson's question, and then if you have any responses for that.
Okay. With regard to your question about, is there a mechanism by which this, is there a problem? Just to paraphrase. You are accurate in that I don't believe according to, legally speaking, there is no problem. Legally speaking, at any time, the council can act by ordinance. It doesn't need a charter amendment to do that. So this charter amendment creates a regularized mechanism by which they would take a look at it.
And I might interrupt. That is also something a city council would do, but put on their own agenda to create a regularized mechanism. They could make a policy without amending the charter to say we will revisit our salaries every year.
So chair and members, that is accurate as well. If you'll recall, as I mentioned in the very beginning, there are multiple ways by which the council can, or excuse me, the city can amend its charter. One of those is by the process that you all are doing this evening by making a recommendation to the city council. The other way, one of the other ways is for the city council to initiate the action. So it could, as a body, it's legally allowed to commence the amendment process as well and send it to you. And that starts somewhat of like this, I equate this kind of like a tennis match where you're going back and forth with the language until you come up with language that whole body's agreed. So there are mechanisms by which the council can initiate it. And again, to your point, there's nothing in here that prohibits or prevents absent, if we left everything as is, the council from taking action anytime it wants on its own. So there is no requirement that we have this kind of a change in the charter, which is different from the ones that we just talked about, which we would need to be conforming to state law, et cetera. That's not the case with this one. So I think, again, this is not a legal comment, but I think that it's an inherently tricky topic, right? And so I don't think, this is a part-time job for the mayor and the council members. All the time they spent probably widely varies. So I've never attempted to do math. I've never asked them how many hours they work. And, I've never paid 25 cents an hour. I don't know. The reason that I was asked to bring this for consideration is, again, to have a mechanism by which it sort of prompts the conversation. So you have some people with some experience here, so maybe that would be helpful.
Yes, back and forth from about 1,326. That's the amount that we take that number from Janet. So part of this kind of cuts to what our philosophy is around what kind of measures I've always felt that kind of context where people have other involvements in the council department here. So what was the right thing. And like Jack and I had what I call real jobs. You've got to do it. There's some folks whose job is don't take it as necessarily being a job that's got to have a pay, but it's a real job. But I think it's awkward because it cuts off a certain set of folks in our time whose voices we're going to have representation. And I also figured me and how to profit what I think part of the reason why I don't want to. It has to be fun. But I think woman who's taken the knowledge of power also needs to substitute some work. That just gets to be more difficult. I think something along this concept, I think is the right thing, a little bit more complex. Hey, you gotta use the face kind of thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we all look at these kinds of things. I've always felt that this is a stipend given to more or less kind of cover the cost of your gas and travel. Because no one does it for. And if we look around the city, virtually all of the commissions except for 2 statutory commissions are volunteer. So effectively, I think that's council is an extension of it. And I think that's what we want. We want citizens who are interested in doing this for the benefit of the community rather than for personal enrichment. I understand the issue that Steve brought up about substitution, but from when I started to when I left council, the amount of time that is spent has changed dramatically. And I don't think that any kind of looking at this to be substitute income or ways to enable other people who can't otherwise do it without an increased salary. I still don't think that, unless there's a quadrupling of salary or something extremely large, that it would do that, because the cost of babysitting, for instance, is greater than this. If you look at a city council meeting, every 3 out of 4 Mondays, that type of thing. Yeah, dress time and all the rest of it. Just doesn't work out. And all the vehicles are in place for the council to initiate. If they feel that there's a disparity, and I've never felt that when I was in service. Steve did, since he did initiate. And apparently none of the others. So I think, this is kind of a proposal in search of a problem. And, it's one that I can't support personally.
Commissioner Hunt and Commissioner Stan.
Thank you. And thank you, Louis, for clarifying. That was my initial question, why is this coming before us as a charter commission and we put it on here? And while I can appreciate it from the standpoint of taking those raising and the council has absolutely in place, it's not as though the council can go in again and share the same perspective. And I don't see this as something you do because it's part of your makeup. I mean, I can look at Google and Mark and 30 years ago when I was planning commission and how many hours a week we're doing it not again for recognition, but something that you believe in and want to be part of and a place to use your talents and help under the city. And it's not as though it's part of a, maybe from a private component, there's a government collective bargaining. It's not every year somebody gets in. It's not around that thing. And to put something like on there when we're not dealing with a position that's really been painful and fighting for, I think collective bargaining just doesn't seem like that's right to do. But there is that mechanism in the country that can move forward and do so. I would be opposed to it, and I don't, again, they have that ability to bring it forward and send something to do.
Commissioner Stan.
When I read this, my first thought was, if I was one of those people who was always highly suspicious of everything that came out of city government, in particular the city council, my first question would be, well, salaries and blah, 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 and everything that goes with that, and the red flags would go up, even if I didn't understand, which I probably wouldn't, it's still go. So, I look at as a practical matter, while the city council is not required or is not prohibited from addressing the issue, I can't help but think we could make life easier for them, as if that were a charge, to give them a mandate to review, to have a process for performance review, not basically not performance review, but salary review, so that if there was anything that needed to be done, they couldn't be accused of simply lining their own pockets, in a sense. That I lean towards giving them the excuse of reviewing this, even if they do nothing, which they are still free to do. I think council members, as a rule, are probably loath to bring up the issue of salary for just the reasons, and as contentious as we've been over the years about certain things, we're all the more contentious now as a society, and I think I would like to force the council to at least look at it, and so they can say, hey, we had to do this, and we're not going to do anything but you gotta do it, and I don't think you guys have done it enough. Like, just looking at the list here. So I would speak in favor of this.
I would agree with John. I think it's hard for people to say, I need to get an increase in salary, and especially like what you said, when you've got constituents that are really looking at this and saying, yeah, they're just wanting to get more money, And so if they have this, if they have to talk about it every year, they don't have to approve an increase, but at least it's being looked at every year. The other question I had was, Melissa, was in your research, I know this happens with the legislature and everything else, but were there any cities where the council and mayor did not set their own salary, that they were looked at by the city manager, or they were voted on by some other body? Because, setting your own salary just seems kind of weird to me. Like I said, the legislature does it, everybody does it that way, but I still look at it as kind of an odd practice.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to let Carrie know that the legislature does not set their own salaries. It's done by there is a board of compensation. I'm using the wrong term. I can't recall exactly what it is, but it was about 3 or 4 years ago where this board, which has other functions within the state, took it on the legislature and determined what the compensation should be, and then set an annual rate of adjustment for it.
Is that a national or is it
No, that's
Congress?
just for
Yeah, but
state
Congress,
council.
the National Congress.
No, that's, that's a good question. I don't know for
I
sure.
thought they did.
But I know that there is a body,
I like that.
and I think it's the body that
looks at.
determines the recommendations for staff also for their compensation. But it's an external body who does it. There's, if I might, since I've got the floor, Mr. Chairman. And I meant to mention this earlier on my comments because I think it's the most pertinent one. We have to remember that the charter is our constitution, and I think to deal with something, not that it's trivial, but compensationalized in a charter just doesn't seem like the appropriate use. If it were to create a commission that did that kind of thing, that I could get on board. I think, forcing an elected person to do something for their own benefit, that says to me, maybe why you have to do that, maybe it's the wrong people in office.
And Commissioner Vogt, I have to add to that, my biggest concern about this is that it's not appropriate for charter, that's not applies to the city's constitution, and with that, Commissioner Vogt.
I wanted to know this response to her research, how other cities set
So the setting, the process by which salaries are, the process by which the salaries are set for the second, third, and fourth classes, so those are cities with a population under 100,000, is the process is in state law, and is that the governing body may by ordinance fix their own salaries and salary chief in an amount as they deem reasonable, and then it doesn't take effect until after the next succeeding municipal election. So those are the two sort of elements.
I'm with that, where we talk about, we have different districts. It's the next municipal election in which every council has, council person.
So, Chair and members, the term municipal election is, I don't want to say defined, but it means something specific in state law. So when that happens, so there's general elections and there's municipal elections. So when there are council members on the ballot,
regardless of whether it's all the council. Commissioner Custer.
Yes, I was going to dive into the minutia of this, but I was just curious. I don't think it's probably appropriate because we should probably take any action. However, I was just curious because we are a police class city and wondering how good we are operating lines with other cities that are similar to us. And how do you attract the best possible elected officials, really?
So just to be clear, the term first class means something in state law.
Yes,
So we're a
I know.
second class, but I figured, I thought you meant probably remarkable.
Yes, yeah, that is what I meant.
So, the tricky part about this analysis is that, we Bloomington, it's a second class city, but we're 10,000 or less from being a first class city. And our most similar, the jobs, the task, is very similar. I often, and people in this room may disagree, but I often think of Rochester as being our most similar type of city. It has Mayo and mall, like we go to the large institution. Population-wise, it just went into being a first-class city. Now, I'll tell you what their salaries are. They're currently part-time, but they've got some discussion. So their mayor is paid $65,700 now, and it's going up to $83,760. The council president, their salary is going to increase to $64,000. The council members' salaries are going to go up to $55,000. Now again, they're now a first class city, and that means more, not just people. They have more. It's significant change. Now by comparison, Duluth, also a first class city, the mayor is paid $97,500 for a full-time position, and counselors are considered part-time, and they earn $13,000. So that's St. Cloud, now they're all part-time. The mayor makes 50, or is paid, I should say, is paid $50,000. The council president $14,000, and council members $12,000. And all parts. Second class. It's actually after the population. Interesting. Their population at 8 is so much lower than the population is going today. It's like 100,000. Yeah, we're like in the 60s. Brooklyn Park, which is very similar to us in population, very, very similar to us in population. Their council members are paid $14.83 a month. So that just gives you an idea. That's the other one I went to. Is 13,600 for the mayor and 10,000 for the council. They're somewhat of a similar size. The other thing to know, that people might not know, is that the positions on Bloomington City Council, mayor and council members, are benefits only. So they also have access to the city's healthcare. That's a relevant part.
So I view this as the item before us is not looking at salaries and not really considering who makes what. That is a council item. But what I was wondering for some of these examples, and I think I asked a question on how many of these cities mandate in their charter as we are asked to consider tonight that salaries? That can be expressed for too, I believe our council members, you know, by age of their leaders, they should be able to, if they believe that the conversation is done, they should be able to come to step on the plate and ask them that become an agenda item and have a discussion on the whole salary. I just don't believe this is really appropriate charter, nor do I think it's necessary. And again, we could spend a lot of time talking about salary, who makes what, but we're not here to discuss that. I don't necessarily. Unless you're making the assumption that by putting this in the charter, we will automatically see councils acting and raising their. I believe I saw Commissioner Coleman. Did you have a hand up there?
Oh, yeah, just like 10-second comment, I wanted to say also that, I don't know the direction this should go. It feels important, but it doesn't feel appropriate here.
Yes, but I think the look at the nature of governmental operation, they operate. So I just went quickly to look at Rochester. So Rochester owns the record. We don't own it. Rochester owns an airport and $6 million. Spent very years in buses in Rochester County. So I'm guessing that if you go get here, and I didn't go look at that, but I would guess that the economic Rochester will be 3 or 4 times the county. So for the cities, I think the best kind we really want to talk about the suburban suburbs like Bloomington tend to be very focused on commercial development. And that's strong commercial would be the best. They run different kind of business. But at that point, I do what people are saying about the what is going on.
And again, we have a city manager, government where a lot of the activities of their cities are handled by cities. Big mayor, strong city manager, and the government required. Any other questions, comments regarding this subject?
Is there another mechanism that we
What's being recommended from the council can take their own action to adopt an ordinance that will put this on, do exactly what we're being asked to do. Current council.
An ordinance is something that people have to continue to do.
But they can do just this. The council could pass an ordinance to people the council salaries and the ability to cover.
Yeah, I just have one question. I mean, you're saying that the city charter, that the charter doesn't need to address this, but this is already in the charter, right? It's section 207 in the charter, correct?
Not sure, remember, the language that is not underlined is already in the short.
It's already, so it is already addressed in the charter, right? So it's just whether we want to actually.
Any further discussion? If not, there is a record of Commissioner.
I would just make a motion to deny section 5.4 charter.
Second.
Motion to deny. Now, do we need to actually see the motion? I mean, we're being asked to consider an amendment, so proper approach to see if somebody makes a motion, to see if it fails, or we take a motion.
Chair, my recommendation would be that you would act on the motion that's on the floor, and then you would go down to the one.
Okay. So we have a motion to deny the request. Does that make sense now that I think about it? All right.
Can we just be clear, because I did make a motion on this.
Right, right. And that's what yeah, exactly.
So I make sure we're.
Yeah, exactly.
For the record, for the recording, what I heard was a motion by Commissioner Hunt, a second by Commissioner Beloga, to deny the recommended, or not the recommended, the resolution that's in the packet, that would amend charter, chapter, section 2.07.
Okay.
Okay, is that okay?
Okay. Point of clarification. Commissioner Moore.
So if this motion passes, that seems to negate the motion that's in the packet. Is that
That was in effect my question.
Chair members, if it passes, and there is no motion made on the one that's in the packet, whether it actually fails for lack of a second, or otherwise isn't acted on, then there has been action on it. And so long as everybody understands that this is moving forward and this is the beginning and the end of the story on this item, then I'm comfortable with it.
All right, I will now take a vote on this item. All commissioners in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
And Stanley and Weatherby, anyone else? Gustafson? So motion passes with three votes. Commissioner Barnes.
Comment? Well, my comment is that this is an issue as far as salary for mayor and council. Couldn't they put like a 2% annual increase into the compensation package? The council could do that.
Could ask to have this on the agenda, ask them to do that. Hey,
It doesn't take effect though until after. No, it doesn't.
there's nothing to stop the council from acting on raising everyone's salary $30,000 if they want to. And that's the prerogative of the council.
And if they have to stand up for re-election, that's the checks and balances.
Right.
Okay. And then, if we have anybody who'd like to make a motion in favor, motion from the packet on charter amendments to section 1. Commissioner Westley? So moved. Need a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Stanley? I will now do a vote. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And all those not in favor say no. No. And so the numbers are the same. Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you, everyone.
I can't help but be reminded when we were dealing with the ranked choice voting
Exactly.
issue, when we're not exactly always clear as to what, in my mind, what we're voting for. And it seemed like one time we were one vote one way and the other time we were one vote the other way. It all worked out, I think, but it was, I should go there for a little bit.
Well, if you remember also, we really had four on that.
Yes.
And, making sure nobody signed out early.
All right, on to item 9.1. This is to appoint the recording secretary. Do we have any motions to appoint the recording secretary? I'm sorry. All right, item 8.1, approve the draft report of our meeting. We have motion by Lindell, second by Taylor. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Or not opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, on to item 9.1, and that's action to appoint a recording secretary. Every nomination.
I will try to find
I'll second.
that guy.
Yep, hi.
Are you willing?
I am willing.
I will say, despite some of the technical, or some of the this in the packet, Adrian did completely figure out this tech solution tonight by shifting all of this over and it's pulling out. Thank you.
First.
All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Not opposed, motion passes unanimously. And then item 9.2, appoint an attorney. We have any nominations?
I would nominate someone.
Motion by Lindell, who is our second? Commissioner Gustafson, all in favor?
Point of discussion.
Commissioner Bullock.
I know that at some of the prior meetings there was discussion of the efficacy of scrubbing the board. So, we'll take that as, the city attorney also being the attorney for the charter division, and that we don't have the right for counsel. There is an awful under the state law. So, is that something that the charter commission would like to discuss before acting on this?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, we did have, when I first joined the Charter Commission, for years had also assessor that represented the Charter Commission. And I get very against it at the end of the day. Sorry, that was with convenience that we want.
I'd like to add that both the HRA and portfolio have independent counsel. And they do because it's statutorily required. But I think that this is as close as you can get to a similar set of circumstances, which is why I raised the discussion.
I think there's circumstances. I see circumstances. I can see circumstances. One benefit I think things that we're considering governance of the city that makes it more. And I also think that Melissa has done a good job of advising us. I think we'll take one place this year, but I think having a conversation.
And I'm not advocating either forward. I'm just wanting to have a discussion on the issue of understanding. Because it was made during agenda item, I think a year or two ago, maybe more. and it never really had closure in my mind. So it seemed appropriate to have some discussion now. And this really isn't probably the ideal time to do it. But it's the time when it, was on my mind. So there you go.
Chair members, Chair and Commissioner, just a point of clarification to a comment that was made. Under the Port Authority statutes, the city attorney is the legal advisor. And then it allows the Port Authority to appoint additional counsel, including so it's been the practice of the city of Bloomington that we go out for contract for general legal services for the Port Authority, and then I ask for the discussion. But just a point of clarification that as to the Port Authority, that's and I believe in the HRA, it says it's an employee's own counsel in this, which at the city of Bloomington, the HRA has outside counsel at this time. And again, that we and the planning commission has, which is another statutory created by, it has in-house for the attorney in our
Can you envision circumstances where you yourself recommend people charge yourself recommend consider outside counsel, on a issue specific case?
So Chair and Commissioners, a little bit about my professional ethics, not just me as a person, but me and my legal profession. So our rules of ethics indicate specifically and uniquely with regard to the client of the corporation. And in this case, Bloomington is a municipal, the city of Bloomington is a municipal corporation. And the rules say that the client is the city. And it's not the city manager, it's the city as a corporate entity, which, as you can imagine, creates some situations sometimes. So I see my role as being counsel to the city, which is why, for example, you heard me say tonight, when we talked about the salaries, city managers asking me to bring this forward for your consideration. There are multiple ways for this to happen. I see my role as being in service to the corporation. Certainly I'm open to any concerns that people have about that or any suggestions as to the specific question you asked about are there times or could there be times? I think that's possible. For example, if there was language about my status as an employee or my status as being classified or unclassified or something that directly impacted me and that I felt that I was incapable of being impartial. Depending upon what it was, I would suggest that the deputy city attorney, one of them, there's two, that one of them be counsel to you. Or if it was something that touched both me as well as other people in the department and we were all conflicted on it, then I would recommend outside counsel. And frankly, my ethics demand that. So our rules of professional responsibility and ethics rules demand that sort of behavior. And similarly, I would also say that our employment rules require that. Our employment rules speak specifically to not being involved in action that have direct financial impact. So, for example, if there was something about compensation or something that directly impacted me, I would not feel comfortable giving counsel on that without adequate protections or without the law. So, I'm not trying to make a self speech, but I am trying to just sort of clarify for folks that about who the client is and why I say some of the things that I say the way I say them. And certainly, welcome the conversation. I will say, that I'd be happy to provide you with information about how other cities handle it. I know, for example, I've been either the attorney or assistant attorney for another charter commission in another city, provided assistance to other charter cities. And so I can certainly reach out to them and do a bit of an informal survey, and perhaps bring that to you at the next annual meeting. And provide it.
Thanks, John. Commissioner Stan.
Just to follow up on the comments that Gordon made, I think it's extremely important, the question that you raised. I mean, I think it's important that we think about this from time to time, because there are certain circumstances where it would be extremely relevant. I don't know that since my short term so far that that's been the case, and I have a high level of confidence in the current attorney's abilities to shepherd us through some of this stuff. As frustrated as I am sometimes with the language requirements involved in this, but I think as long as we are mindful that we can go outside for legal assistance, we should be mindful of that. And at this point, I don't know how we want us to do so. Confident as Commissioner Gibson said, and what we've gotten so far. Plus, I think it's very helpful to have someone, we'll say, new role, who is working for the city to kind of interpret some of this, what's really happening. So, that's awesome.
Any further comments in the session?
Yes, I can just, Commissioner Stanley, where I think, backlash, a lot of times, let's say the switches in the statute, sometimes it's about because there's a consensus in the community that they want the power. But sometimes it's occurs because they decide to do a lot of things. Because remember, that we were a statutory city, we had a 5 so we would all serve at one. We had a city manager, we had a city administrator. We had some important differences. So when charters come along, there's we do them, and we often have a big body that's the first point we elected charters. So having kind of representation. I think it was important. If we decided, we came to a consensus of the commission that city government should grow in some way. Say we decided we needed an 11-member city council, we wanted to make the conference full term. Because we thought that required where we were at odds with what the city council might want. We might want to get that. So that we don't put the city attorney in the and that might be as much just extracting her from the situation as it would be directly getting the situation. Notwithstanding the representation I believe all. Sometimes we do things not because it serves you better, but it helps something else on the situation. Any other comment? Now I'll call the vote.
Can I ask a question? Would you like me to do that work, or checking with the other charter cities? Under the record report?
Commissioner Blow.
Thank you. For my part, I don't think until the commission feels that it's necessary, that it's more doing it more honest and having that discussion. Since, again, I only brought it up because in the back of my memory there was an item that was out there and not answered. So, by the commission, because it was brought up in the sector. At the time, that wasn't full report discussion. So, I think that we have it, and I think that everyone expresses their confidence in Melissa, and I certainly do. And I don't know if there's been a motion on it.
Motion by,
It was.
Michelle,
Okay.
And then I think the consensus is that you don't need to spend time. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. On to item 9.3, electing a chair. Do we have any nominations for chair? Do we have any nominations?
Well, I would nominate Mr. Chair, and since you have a lot to do, I would nominate Commissioner.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I should learn my lesson. It's better to go now.
Wait.
Um,
Like you're out of it, yeah.
I can apply pressure.
Yeah.
Literally.
You made a second? All right. As I get older, so we have a motion by Hunt, a second by Stanley, to elect Steve Peterson as chair of the Charter Commission. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Commissioner
And
Peterson.
then on to electing a vice chairperson. Can we be nominated?
Chair, I'll nominate you.
We have a current vice chair.
Really, really hard.
Any nomination? We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. We have no nays. Motion passes unanimously. All right. What's that? Oh, yes. Item 10.1 will set the date for the next Charter Commission meeting, and I'm sure we have a recommendation. And with that, I'll just ask the question, has there been any kind of rumblings about anything that could come up yet for the Charter Commission?
Chair members, I have not heard, I have not been asked to weigh in, or to have you all weigh in on anything. If we do, it will be dependent upon the timeframe in which people want to have it. But at this point, I haven't heard anything. And frankly, I made it as I do each year, and just in case people don't know this, at the beginning of the year, reach out to all the department heads and reminding them repeatedly that I need them to reread the charter and then tell me if anything in there needs to be fixed or changed or updated or whatever. Reread the charter. It's an annual thing that, I do it all the time. And remember, you realize something every time you reread it. So the sort of ideas trickle in after that. I put a deadline and then we start research and drafting in March and April, and then actually in March, and then we have the time to go out to all. So that's the general process. If you're hearing about things, obviously, let me know, and we can work with the chair to find a date that works. Now, just as a reminder, we're in sort of regular meeting times, and so if there is a time that you are not able to attend the meeting, always make sure you're in communication with Adrian about that, so that we can make sure to have whatever we need to do done to meet the requirements of the meeting. It's so great to see everyone's faces, literally and figuratively and otherwise. And I hope that we'll be able to continue to be like this for a long, long time. But just a reminder to stay in communication with them.
Thank you, Jim.
Is there a process where the company yes, something yes, is this consistent?
Everything, sure, everything. Yes, that's a part of our reviews. So every every time there's an ordinance that's proposed for consideration by the city council, we have a requirement in our statute that I sign it, at least the statute, or city code, that I sign it as approving it. And so I try to read all of them. And I also have, we have at the city a mechanism by which every single resolution and ordinance is reviewed by someone of a legal term. And frankly, every single notice, every single contract, I have to sign a contract as a member, that's a requirement of the chapter 6 of the charter. And every policy, everything gets reviewed. All of those documents get reviewed by the staff.
That's where the box stops.
That's where the chest pain starts, yeah. So there is a mechanism built in, and we have a electronic system that processes to do that, and things cannot go on the agenda for the city council until the magic buttons are then pressed to that.
Commissioner Sanders.
I'm not sure what the correct term is, but in the interest of information, since we had to deal with the liquor issue a few years back, food trucks has now been up before council. Is that strictly a council and public hearing matter?
Chair, and commissioners, food trucks, that we did that work out at the last meeting. I had to go to the fund. And the reason that the park liquor was and so is liquor law by an election, and you're going to change your intoxicating liquor laws. And that's what we have.
I just wasn't sure what the difference was because they often, people
Yes.
often put them together.
Yes, so if somebody had to have, or if somebody wanted to have a food truck with liquor in it, that would be a whole other
Sure.
that I'm not familiar with that.
But you think they don't have?
I haven't been asked. I'm sure that's under a different licensing and permit and all the rest. That is all handled in actually the city clerk's office.
Okay. The second question is simply with respect to redistricting, is that also strictly council business?
Chair, so the redistricting process is in state law, it's statutory. And then there, the Secretary of State releases sort of like guides for the city clerks to navigate through that process. There's a timeline. The technically, I guess, the legislature could act, but now more common is the courts that act, and then it sort of trickles down, and everybody has a certain amount of time and deadlines by which they have to get everything in place, and then how they draw those lines is also in statute, specifically, about polling places and changing margins and you need to try to go to the lines and all the rest. And so it sort of trickles down and then it gets down.
It's another for us.
Sorry, long answer to yes. You could put something in your charter perhaps. Because
Right. So refresh my memory.
So,
Did we set our date for the next term?
no,
Mr.
Not
Chairman,
that time.
I believe that question has already been asked and answered in the report of the Bloomington Charter Commission. The last item sets the date as May 4th, 2022.
We have such a motion.
that's what that draft report. Yes.
But it is approved.
So no need for a motion.
I think, well, it does say 7.
Court,
We
before.
could probably just act and have a motion. We have a motion, we have a second. Second by Taylor, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. My favorite part of the agenda.
I'll move for adjournment.
We have a second. Motion by Weatherby, second by Hunt, to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
It's too much fun.
Thank you, everybody.
You don't record that, do you?
I absolutely do.
That was all in jest, right?
Yeah.